I'm Jim Paymar, and you are listening to The Big Shift, the podcast that looks at the seismic changes our world, our economies, and our institutions are confronting. Today, we're discussing a subject that's in the news every day: the horrific war being waged by the Russian Federation in their attempt to seize and control the democratic nation of Ukraine in the heart of Europe. You've all seen the video of terrible destruction being rained down on the Ukrainian civilian population by Russian missiles, bombs, and drones, the mass graves of innocent civilians executed by Russian troops. Most thought this kind of terror would never happen again after the horrors in World War II. However, before the current Russian massacre, there was another genocidal war in the early 1990s as the former Yugoslavia disintegrated and Serbs, Croatians, and Bosnians fought for control of territory. Joining me now to discuss the parallels between today's war in Ukraine and the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina is Leila Prnjavorac, a communications expert, a lecturer, and a freedom ambassador who now resides in The Hague. Leila, welcome to The Big Shift, and glad you could find the time.
Thank you, Jimmy, and thank you for the invitation. So
Well,
nice.
it's wonderful that you are here, and we're about 6 hours apart. I'm in New York, and you are in The Hague, which is near the sea in the Netherlands, just to give our audience kind of a bearing as to where you are. And Leila, you were born and you lived as a young girl in Bosnia before the war broke out. And you had Serbian and Croatian neighbors and friends until you were about 9 years old. But then, from what I've read, everything seemed to change in a moment. The world turned upside down. Can you explain what happened?
Definitely. The interesting thing in my life that everything changes within 24 hours. So I was 9 and it was around May, and I was with my uncle and aunt in Sarajevo because my uncle has bought some buildings for my nieces because they were studying pharmacy, and he wanted to inspect that because they are opening their own apothecary and a few apartments. And we went over there, and I went along with them because these were my favorite nieces.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in Sarajevo, and as a kid I had this very, I don't know, it was not missing a feeling of something is off. There was something going on. And in the news as a kid, I saw a lot of things going on. Bombs were placed. You saw all these sandbags all over the cities and everything. And I asked my parents what was going on. And they said that I didn't have to worry, that this was going to pass and people are going to come to their senses. So my parents let me also go on this trip without any hesitation. And we were supposed to stay for 2 weeks, I think, or something. But I had this awful feeling as a kid, and I kept asking my aunt and uncle to go back to Doboj, where we were from. And in the end, they caved, and they were like, okay, let's go back because this kid, we cannot handle her crying out to go to her mother. And
Mm-hmm.
we packed up, and my youngest niece also decided to come back with us, and my oldest niece stayed. And while we were leaving the city was closed with these sand bags. And it was the moment that Sarajevo became an enclave, or enclave. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it well.
Enclave, yes.
Yes. So that was the moment. So this intuition that I had as a kid really saved our lives, because otherwise we would have been there for 5 years in the awful siege on Sarajevo.
But
Because
didn't
all
you
the
also hear that there were rumors of soldiers coming down from the hillsides?
yeah,
And,
definitely. We were that weekend when we came home. I went up to the hills because we had a weekend house and a friend of ours also, and we were playing in the fields. And out of nothing, these men came running down, and they were screaming like, "You need to flee because the war is starting. You need to flee." And we looked at her uncle and aunt, and they were saying to us, come into the car, we're going back to the city. And we came back, and I went up to my parents and I said, the war is starting, the war is starting. And they were like, don't be so silly, Leila, go out and play and not.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
within few hours, I was playing outside like they told me. And we were living in the center, behind the center mosque. So in front of the mosque, on the main street in Doboj, there were all these men walking, and behind them you had a lot of trucks, and they had these megaphones, and they were announcing like, Bosnian, you need to flee, the war is going to come, and this is your chance. And
And
out of nothing, there was
just for the audience's edification, Bosnia was a Muslim state, correct?
not only
No, but not only, but a majority Muslim, right?
yeah, majority Muslims, yeah, and probably all changed this religion during the Ottoman era, because
Uh-huh.
probably all of us have been or Catholic or Orthodox, like the Serbs, and the Catholics like the Croatians. So a lot of us of there probably chose in those days to become Muslim to have a better life. So
Uh-huh.
that's the interesting thing, and I think that is one of the similarities with Ukraine. You have these people who are brothers and sisters in killing each other. You know
I
what?
know.
So
It's just appalling. In your view, what was the main cause for this conflict breaking out? Under Marshal Broz Tito, the president until his
yeah,
death in 1980, Yugoslavia was relatively unified for decades after World War
yeah,
II, and then we saw the rise of nationalism based along, I
and
guess, ethnic and religious lines. What was the spark that lit the fire?
the spark was always there, and they were all the Serbs were always singing songs in the war of we have fought all three wars, the two big ones, and this is our third, and we are fighting for our little Serbia, but also we need to kill the Turks. And I remember going into the house and asking my mother, who are the Turks? And she said, we are the Turks. And I said, how are we the Turks? Because
Mm-hmm.
we have the Muslim religion. So this goes back to the Ottoman era,
Right.
where they found that they have lost land, and that was the time that their dream of the little Serbia was taking away, or the big Serbia. So yeah, that's one of the seeds of this all. So also a similarity with Russia and Ukraine. It's also something that Russia feels it's theirs and
Mm-hmm.
need to take back. So you see how in a lot of times hatred and all these things run through
Mm-hmm.
generations, and they really are given forward. So it's also in our hands to change all of this. We have that power too.
Let me back up just for a second. So uh, the Bosnians are Muslim majority, and the Serbs were more Orthodox. Is
Yeah,
that correct? And
yeah,
the Croatians were Catholic.
yeah.
Okay,
And
so
then you had other groups there, like the Roma Sinti. You had the Jews. You have um, atheists. So you have a lot of people living in former Yugoslavia.
okay, so this conflict, I mean, was extremely brutal and vicious in Bosnia. Not unlike what we're seeing in Ukraine today. There were constant Serbian attacks during the war, from firing tanks from neighboring hills, artillery bombardment, the threat of snipers, and no one was safe in Sarajevo. I mean, that's what I recall of the war. And in reading some of the history, the siege of Sarajevo lasted nearly 4 years,
Hmm.
1,425 days. That's three times longer than the Battle of Stalingrad. And apparently 13,000, close to 14,000 people were killed during the siege, including 5,500 civilians. The thought of this is just
A lot
really
of
hard to fathom.
yeah, yeah. And then you had all the genocide what took place all over former Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Of and Doboj was one of the cities that was in their cleansing area. So after about 1.5 years, they announced to us, to all the Bosniaken, that's how we were called, Bosnians, like, this is your last chance to escape and flee the city. And if you stay, you are not certain of your life, because in some cases they put like crosses on your house, and people knew who lived where, and they have had all these lists of who you were, what you did before the war, and everything was like paid back, like in a very horrific way. So my parents knew they didn't want to go. They didn't want to leave the country that they loved and they lived for so many centuries in. And they didn't want to go anywhere. But we needed, it was or life or death. So that's why they decided to pay a lot of money, because you needed to pay a lot of money to get on these convoys.
To get out of the country.
To get out of the city. And it was on my school playground where we collected, and they were taking all the adults apart and then searching them all over. And with the kids, thankfully they didn't go that far as they did with adults. It was really brutal. And it was, for me as a kid, a possibility to take some pictures from my childhood with me, because they prohibited us to take anything valuable. I couldn't take any teddy bear or anything with me, my doll, or because we could hide money or jewelry in there. And they prohibited photos, because if those convoys would have been captured, you could been put on a line, and then they would shoot you and put you in a mass grave.
It must have been absolutely terrifying for everyone.
It was. And but for a kid, because my mother never showed fear, it was I really amazing. If I look back at it, she was so amazing for us kids. She made it like that, La Vita è Bella, like a story. So it felt for us as kids more as an adventure, going on an adventure. She made it less fearful. And when we came to Belgrade, just before we stepped out of and we had our first hiding address, and that's where we met the person who helped us to come to the Netherlands, because my father just had no idea where to go.
Okay, well, let's back up for a second, because you mentioned ethnic cleansing. Now, a lot of people are not aware of what that really means, but what was occurring in Bosnia, the Serbs were literally trying to eliminate the Bosniak Muslims, displace them from the entire country. And they actually created concentration camps such as Srebrenica.
Yeah.
And 8,000 men and boys were massacred there. And they also put together these large rape centers, and it's estimated 20,000 women were forcibly raped. Well, were they trying to make these women have Serbian children so that they could eliminate the Bosniak culture? I mean, how could this happen after the Holocaust in Europe less than 50 years earlier?
And it was also a lot of things that happened during the Holocaust were like a blueprint of what happened in Bosnia. So they used these same kind of systems, and raping women is the most violent way to harm women. That's because when you harm these women, you harm all these families, and you have the big honor. And harming women in Muslim countries, of course, kills the honor of the family. So there's and the greatest thing, the most horrific thing that you can do to a woman is to rape her. And there were also a lot of children born out of these rapes.
Well, and this was all part of the ethnic cleansing program, I guess. And
it's not that they killed the Bosnian Muslim. The ethnic cleansing went all the way. They only wanted Serbs to live in these areas, so everybody who was not a Serb was killed. So in Srebrenica, you only had mostly people living there were Muslim religion, but there was one, for example, Catholic family who was also killed. So everybody who wasn't Serbian. That's what ethnic cleansing means. They only want to have their own ethnicity.
and then they called it actually the Republic of Srpska. It was kind of another entity. While there was a nation of Serbia, they wanted to create this Republic of Srpska in Bosnia. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you have that still. You have Republika Srpska, and Dobo is one. The city where I'm from is also part of the Republika Srpska, and they are now also trying to make that part of Bosnia a part of Serbia. So
Mm-hmm.
they want to take that part also away and become a larger part of Serbia.
So this is still going on even today.
Even going on today. And also, like, you have all these villains like Mladic and Karadzic, and they're putting up statues for these men as heroes.
Mm-hmm.
So you have history lessons in the same country, giving children get different history lesson about the history. One deny all these genocide and ethnic cleansing, and others and make it like look like a heroic something that people done to create the Serbia that exists now, and the others know what really happened and the horrific stuff that made this all possible.
Getting back to Srebrenica for a moment, prior to the massacre, the United Nations declared the besieged enclave of Srebrenica a safe area, which was supposed to be under UN protection. And the UN sent in I think it was like 370 lightly armed Dutch soldiers to protect the Bosnians. But, they were unable to prevent the town's capture and the subsequent massacre. What went wrong? Why such little protection against a superior armed force like Serbia?
Because the rest didn't do anything. They were calling for help, and they were help was promised, and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't come. And there are different stories of the reasons why, but it would be very good after this year becoming the big sorry from the Dutch government to the um, Bosnian government, and also, of course, the Srebrenica people, that now we go and have a big research what happened at the UN and what happened all
Why?
why
Why?
they
Why there was no
yeah,
protection? Why there wasn't
because
more?
it's
Uh,
not a Dutch thing, it's not a Bosnian thing, it's a world thing, and we need to learn from our mistakes and um, learn why these people weren't helped and saved.
well, now getting back to your family, now you were able to escape the war because I think your father had friends in Belgrade, and and
And
you
they were
were
Serbian friends, by the way, yeah. So we
they were
captured,
Serbs, yes.
but we were also helped by Serbs. So I have no hate for nobody. I only
Mm-hmm.
want justice to prevail, and I really wish everybody a very good life. And I really also do believe that we can live together, and we cannot live without each other, because we have always lived on that part of the earth together. So we are also the answer.
Yes, yes, yes.
Uh,
And now after Belgrade, you settled in Western Europe. You settled in The Hague.
yeah, in the end, yeah.
Yes, and getting back to the whole UN protection situation and the massacre in Srebrenica, the Dutch state was found liable in the Dutch Supreme Court and the Hague District Court of failing to do enough to prevent the deaths in Srebrenica. Should more have been done? Could more have been done? And what are your thoughts about living in Holland today, living among the Dutch?
I think it's very important that justice has prevailed, so that these people have their justice, and they know that they've been fighting for recognition for so many years. And it would have been so much more beautiful if it didn't have to go all this process, but they would just admit it right away. But in the end, the justice prevailed, and I hope now that we can also look into the greater picture of what happened over there, so that we understand but also can learn from all these experiences, because genocide and ethnic cleansing, and it's also a system, and it happens in a lot of places all around the world, and we need to do something about that, and not stand there and just look and think it's not on our part of the world.
Right. Well, we saw it in Cambodia. We saw it in Rwanda. We saw it with the
And we're seeing it now
Europe.
from Ukraine.
Yeah, and speaking of Ukraine, right now I think I understand there are 8 million refugees and approximately the same number of displaced Ukrainians from their homes. I mean, what does that do to the human psyche, Leila? How are you able to survive losing your home, your country, being forced to flee to a new country where you don't even speak the language? I believe there were 1.3 million Bosnians and Croats who were either deported or resettled during the war. How did your friends and relatives survive all this?
uh you need to start over, and you realize that what you came from, it's gone and it's never going to be back, because that's something was just destroyed with this all. But it's not in everybody's psyche the possibility to start all over. So fleeing a country and going somewhere different, it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of persistence and willingness and inner power. So, for a lot of people, they are still in these countries living abroad, and they are not able to go back to their own cities, because their own cities are not um, in the hands of the people that they would like to be. So you stay displaced. So you need to find new roots and build new roots in the new countries where you live. And for myself, if I look at myself, the Hague became also a full circle experience for me. I came to the city of justice and peace. The villains of my war were sentenced here by
Mhm.
law, and they're some of them are here 20 minutes from my house, in capturing in so I mean,
They're in prison.
you see, yeah, they're in prison. You
Yeah.
see really things coming back. And I think that that war and all this Yugoslavia tribunal is also a good example of the fact that we are not gonna let all these villains now, if it's Syria or if it's Ukraine, we are not gonna let you do this without getting you also sentenced for what you did to all those people. And
Well, when you see the plight of the Ukrainian people today, and you can't, anytime you turn on the TV or open the newspaper, you're seeing these horrific scenes. What are your thoughts about what can be done to stop the murders, stop the massacres, stop the attacks, stop the destruction of vital infrastructure, where people in Ukraine are living without water, electricity, and even food?
yeah, because that's the way you starve people, and you can make them surrender or make them weaker. It's also important for the Russian civilians to get to know and get to the information of what's really going on. So it also takes the responsibility of um, taking the matters in your own hands and standing up against your own um, government. And because if you are there, also of course some of them are also forced to fight a war, or they don't call it a war over there. um so
Special military
yeah,
operation, I think
operation,
they
yeah.
call
So I mean, I think it takes a lot of courage also for people to stand up, and you see that that's happening, but they're also like right away trying to prevent that.
it.
But
Hmm.
in these systems and in countries where it's so difficult to stand up for who you are and your rights, and for injustice, I think one of the things is that really people also from abroad need to inform their own families, and because and we need to stand together. And I think the power of the Ukrainian people are also that they are willing to stand up and fight for their country.
Well, they are fighting a tremendous battle against a much larger country with much more powerful weapons. Do you think that the United States, the European Union, the United Nations are doing enough to stop this senseless, bloody war in Ukraine and the hatred of the what I like to say is the other? I mean, you talked earlier about the Russians and Ukrainians. Basically, they're 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 related. You know,
Hmm.
they've lived together for hundreds, thousands of years, and but this quest for territorial gain and this I don't know. It seems like there's almost an inevitability of mankind uh, just never learning to live together. Is there an answer to this?
uh, there's always these big shifts you're talking about. It's what it's all about. And unfortunately, the big shifts in the world most of the time happen with a war.
Mm-hmm.
And if we talk about ourselves being this evolved nations and being people who are live in this civil part of the world or whatever, I don't know if we are there yet, because
Yeah.
not a way of treating each other civil. So I hope, really, because they are trying to prevent this new big third world war.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why um, people are in these different countries and coalitions are doing this differently now. But
Right.
I don't know what the cost is. Again, so many people, innocent people, losing their lives
For
for
no reason, for
for
no, and children, and
yeah.
it's just horrifying. And you know, the one big difference today in this war with Russia and Ukraine, which did not exist when the Bosnians and the Serbs and the Croats were fighting, was nuclear weapons. And we have nuclear weapons in Russia.
Yeah.
Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons when the Soviet Union came apart in the 90s. So you have a different situation. But do, do you think that there's a way to stop these kinds of war crimes in the future by leaders like Vladimir Putin or Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia, whose surrogate Radovan Karadzic attacked Bosnia, from perpetrating this kind of horrible violence and destruction? I mean, do you see a way that we can actually try Vladimir Putin for war crimes? Because he's certainly guilty of them.
Yeah, and I hope that this city here, the city of justice and peace, that they will come here. But a lot of our economies run on the weapon industry. So it's also a very big part of income of a lot of countries for having wars all over. So reinventing the system means changing also the way we earn our money. Can
Yeah.
I say it is in that easy way? And maybe a bit simplistic, but it's also one of these things that we also need to think about.
Yeah, the arms industry. I mean,
Yeah.
a multi-trillion-dollar industry,
Yeah. So you need
exporting
war.
weapons,
Yeah.
building weapons, and then they have to be used so that you can
So
develop new weapons.
you understand what I mean? And it's a lot of big countries like your own is also depending on these industries. People have their jobs there. They, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that we created also and keep creating. So we need to rethink and rechange our way of thinking. And because we have never had such a long period of peace in Western Europe, for
Mm-hmm.
example.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim, we never had world peace.
No,
And
no.
that's the saddest thing, if you, because that's the thing that we all wish for, and freedom and having peace is the core of every human. But we keep creating this because there are other interests, and we really also need to look at that.
Yes, yes. I'm just wondering, now that you're living in The Hague and you've got a couple of kids and you've reestablished your life. What how is your life today, and what do you think about the past?
You know what? You said like in the war in Bosnia and in Herzegovina there was no nuclear things going on.
Mm-hmm.
I have a few years ago I had cancer, and the reason for my cancer is was the fact that I was exposed as a kid to a lot of nuclear waste. So
Uh-huh.
doctor asked me if I was from Chernobyl, and I said no, but I've lived in a war. So
Mm-hmm.
all these weapons and a lot of weapons that were also used in the war in former Yugoslavia were from World War One and two. So there was also a lot of nuclear waste, and what we were throwing now also on these kids there,
Mm-hmm.
and but not only on the kids, also into our earth is also a lot of waste of a lot
You,
of things that we don't
your
want.
uranium and thorium and some of
Yeah,
the yes, the nuclear components.
yeah. And what we don't realize is having all these wars, we are also like polluting our world in such a horrific way because it this goes into our ground, this goes
Mm-hmm.
whether water into our air and to our bodies because
Mm-hmm.
like I was have no protection yet.
Right, right. I just was reading in the New York Times about how parts of Ukraine look like the moon, that there are so many craters
Yeah,
now from the bombs, and these
yeah,
bombs have poisons in them.
yeah. And that's it. And those kids and those people are exposed to that. And I'm a living proof of developing cancer in later in life. And my cancer, my doctor said your body is so healthy, if you wouldn't have lived there you would have never been sick. Your
Hmm.
cancer is caused by nuclear waste.
Right, and Ukraine is called the breadbasket of Europe. I,
So that's the thing. I was also talking here in the media about the fact that our food is going to come from there. What's happening to the soil and the ground?
mhm.
You need to really get into and have research into that.
I mean, the questions and the problems, they almost seem insurmountable, and it's hard to believe that this kind of war is going on today in 2023, and
Yeah.
it's just very sad. And I must bring up a lot of imagery for you, and I'd love to continue our conversation, but I'm out of time right now, and we're going to have to come to a close. But we'll do it in the future, and hopefully this war will end soon. And that was Leila Prnjavorac. She's a communications expert, an entrepreneur, and a freedom ambassador. And she comes to us from The Hague. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about Leila, I'm going to spell her last name so that you can Google her, because there are some interesting things that she's got on YouTube, including the Hague Talks. Now, her name is spelled Leila Prnjavorac. So if you can get that or rewind the podcast a little bit, really interesting talks, and not all of them are in English. I wish there were more of them in English, but very interesting, and she's led a very interesting life, and worth listening to. Now, Leila, thank you so much for taking the time for being with us today.
And thank you, Jing, for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm Jim Paymar, and you have been listening to The Big Shift, available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening today, and stay tuned for the next episode of The Big Shift coming soon. Stay tuned.